Before we begin, a word about language. I'm going to use the word God a lot. And yes, we could say spirit of life or goddess, all these kinds of things. But I'm going to use the word God. And I do come from a Christian background and a Judeo-Christian background. But I will have you know that in Greek, in the Greek New Testament, the word theou, which is God, is a neuter, non-gendered word. Greek has masculine, feminine, and neuter. So I'm using God. It's non-gendered. It's non-binary. It's a word that tradition knows well. So I just want to start off there so everybody can follow along. So we're going to talk about theology, which is serious thought and study about the person, thing, concept of God, divinity. Theology involves not only wrestling with questions about God, but about big mysteries of life. Who are we? Where did we come from? What is all of this? Who's in charge? Is anybody in charge? What's all of this mean? Does it mean anything? We start to reflect on God, we get into all the big questions. We're reflecting on God in many different ways this month. Last week we reflected on the feminine divine. Today we're going to look at some different images and faces of God throughout the Judeo-Christian tradition. Next week we're going to look at what is not God, things we might worship or give the status of divinity to that really aren't all that great, or that might be harmful if we do so. And at the end of the month we're going to look at the absence of God. There are actual theistic spiritualities that only deal in the absence and silence of God. And there's also atheism and agnosticism and all kinds of stuff. So we're doing a lot of theology this month, reflecting about God. When we reflect on God, especially in our Unitarian Universalist tradition, we come up against the fact that this traditional Judeo-Christian image of God is something people have rejected. And kind of understandably so. And we'll get to some reasons why the further we go along. God is an old white man with a beard who sits in the sky in heaven in a cloud and spends a lot of time trying to keep people away from him. And if you're really bad, you get to be punished forever with torture. This is something a lot of folks reject. It's something I reject. It doesn't make any sense to me. So, when we all gather together to think about God, one of the things we've got to think of is this image of God that is so prevalent in our culture. Why does it get that way? And I think it gets that way because, well, we are who we are. We're human beings. And in many ways, we create God in our image, not the other way around. But why wouldn't any created thing, anything in general, think of the ultimate, the divine, in terms of itself? I think it's why we have images of old men and images of God, as you saw a lot of them last week. Relatable human forms we can get to. I think this is a common thing where we, to be able to enter into the consciousness of other living things, if they had any concept of this, they would probably have one that looks like them. In Yeats's poem, The Indian Upon God, he says, I passed along the water's edge below the humid trees. My spirit rocked in evening light and rushes round my knees. My spirit rocked in sleep and sighs and saw the moorfowl pace, all dripping on a grassy slope, and saw them cease to chase each other round in circles, and heard the eldest speak, who holds the world between his bill and made us strong or weak, is an undying moorfowl, and he lives beyond the sky. The rains are from his dripping wing, the moonbeams from his eye. I passed a little further on and heard a lotus talk, who made the world and ruleth it, he hangeth on a stalk. For I am in his image made, and all this tinkling tide is but a single drop of rain between his petals wide. A little way within the gloom a roebuck raised his eyes, brimful of starlight, and he said, the stamper of the skies. He is a gentle roebuck, for how else, I pray, could he conceive a thing so sad and soft, a gentle thing like me? I passed a little further on and heard a peacock say, "Who made the grass and made the worms and made my feathers gay? He is a monstrous peacock, and he waveth all the night, his languid tail above us lit with myriad spots of light." It makes sense for us to have created divine images in our own. And in the tradition a lot of us come out of, this God, in our image, looks like a kindly grandfather, but behaves more like a cantankerous uncle who's going to leave us out of his will if we don't follow his bizarre, contradictory, arbitrary, and unfair rules. And if you get left out of the will and are locked out of the gates of the mansion, you go to a place called hell where you get tortured forever. This cantankerous Uncle God is always watching you, like Big Brother, and will even know your incorrect crime thoughts, thought crimes. And like Big Brother, this God loves you. Kind of does a disservice to love and relationships, and anything we would generally think of as good. Most people who don't believe in God or hate Christianity will cite this God, the God they don't believe in. I don't believe in this God either. This God is unreasonable and unjust. This God is a bully. I wouldn't want to hang out at the pub and have a beer with this guy, never mind let him be God. In fact, this God is evil, even. Would you be friends with anybody who acted that way? No. But even after we leave this God, this concept, this image of God behind, in a sense we still believe in it. This image or face of God tends to be the only one, whether we accept it or reject it. And in some way, it becomes just as fundamentalist and literal for our rejection as it is for people who believe. This is God. For it or against it, this is it. But there's much more deeper thought about God. Many faces and images. If we can't get past this cantankerous, old, angry, uncle bully monster, then we can't imagine why otherwise rational and intelligent people might still believe or have faith in or trust in or try to connect to God. In order to fully consider these deeper questions about what God might be like beyond this image most of us reject, we need to be at a mature place in our life and a mature place in our spiritual life. Following in the footsteps of Piaget, Erickson, and Kohlberg, James Fowler published a developmental model of religious faith and spiritual growth in a 1981 book called Stages of Faith. Fowler says that the stages apply not just to Christianity, but to any religious or spiritual tradition. These are Fowler's 6 stages of faith. Stage 1 is intuitive projective faith, and this is early in life, where God and religion is fantasy and fable and myth, and we pick up ideas about God from our family and the people we are around. Stage 2 is the mythical, literal faith, which begins when we're about school age, and we accept ideas and religious stories and understanding about God in literal ways. Some people, especially fundamentalists of any stripe and scriptural literalists, remain here in stage 2 their entire lives. Stage 3, synthetic conventional faith, which starts to develop in people around teenage years. And a person usually adopts some sort of all-encompassing belief system. They try to make everything fit into one system. And they usually don't recognize they are in a box created by that system. And they have trouble seeing outside the box or beyond the system. At this stage, authority is usually placed in individuals or groups that represents one's beliefs. And this is the stage, stage 3, where most people remain for their entire lives. Stage 4 is individuative and reflective faith, and begins when we're about young adults. We begin to think outside the box. we recognize there are other faiths, and we become disillusioned with our own, the one we had in stage 3. People in stage 3 tend to think people who are in a stage 4 faith have become backsliders, when in reality, they have moved forward in their development spiritually. Stage 5 is conjunctive faith, and this is rare that it develops in people before midlife. The point where people begin to realize the limits of logic and start to accept life's paradoxes. They begin to see life as a mystery and often return to sacred stories and symbols, but this time without being stuck in that box that says how those stories and symbols must and only be seen and interpreted. And stage 6 is universal faith. Few people at all ever reach this stage of faith. Those who do live their lives to the full in service of others without any real worries or major doubts. They seem convicted beyond conviction and seem to have the integrity where their walk matches their talk. People like Gandhi, Buddha, Jesus, Moses, the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, Mother Teresa, etc., and so on. When we get stuck in that stage 2 and 3 faith, stuck in that literal place, it prevents us from fully developing ourselves and our spirit. When we hit stage 4, we get to do deep reckoning with the problem of God, which up to now, through our life, stage 1, 2, and 3, had easy answers that we just accepted, even though they didn't really answer the question. The God problem is this: God is good. God is all-powerful. Bad things happen. You can reconcile any 2, but you can't reconcile all 3. So this mythic, literal image of God that comes to us in our traditions falls apart. Doesn't make any sense. Seems mean. This is where we run into what philosopher Charles Hartshorne calls the 6 mistakes about God. These are the 6 mistakes. God is perfect and unchangeable. God is omnipotent, all-powerful. God is omniscient, all-knowing. God is a source of unsympathetic goodness. God provides immortality as a career for us after death. We either go up or down the career ladder. God is infallible and unable to make mistakes. Wrestling with these big 6 mistakes makes many of us come to realize that if God is not all these things, then God is not anthropomorphic. It can't be like a human, because humans are definitely not any of those things. Perhaps not even a person in the sense that we understand person. And then maybe, if this is so, can we really have a personal relationship with God? Thinking about God expands at this point into the deeply theoretical. So I want to talk a little bit about God in terms of ideas that have grabbed my imagination through my study and experience. One is God as something woven into the fabric of existence. American Lutheran theologian Paul Tillich called this God woven through the fabric of existence, the ground of all being. Some people misunderstand what Tillich means here, but he does not mean the source of all being, the source of everything. There's some singularity or some creature that created everything else. Rather, God is the ground of all being. It is the thing, the existence, the fabric of which everything is a part. As we would say in Unitarian Universalism, the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. Somebody ever asks you, do you believe in God as Unitarian Universalist? You can, with good conscience, say absolutely. The interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. Just like Tillich. And he was Lutheran. Unitarian James Luther Adams called God the creative, sustaining, and transformative power at the heart of all that is. You've heard me say that a lot. In a sense, it really follows a lot of Tillich. What is at the center of things? Tillich would posit there is no center of things. Adams would say everything has a center. That's a Unitarian and I'm coming out. Everything has one source. And we would go to the Universalists and say, and everything returns to one end together. There's no good, bad, heaven, hell. For process theologians, God is not a being or a source or perhaps even the ground of all being or the fabric of existence. Instead, God is a continually active process. It is the process by which everything happens. Thus, God is continually being created, and instead of being all-powerful, God is all-potential. Process theology says God is that situation where everything in the universe is in relationship to everything else. Everything affects its environment, and the environment is affected by it in a reciprocal circle. The Enlightenment view of the world is of independent object constituent parts, and how to understand things and how they work and how the parts have worked in the past and how they relate to each other. We can figure out how things are, make some predictions about how they will be, and continue to learn to figure out this mechanistic puzzle. Process theology says we can't do that. The Enlightenment view of the world says, I am Tony, and I am in my essence, in a sense, unchangeable. I have been and will always be Tony. So when I got cancer, what I am was not affected. I was Tony, and part of my machine now included a new part called cancer. Following me? Process theology says, I am Tony, and I am constantly becoming and have been Tony. And when I got cancer, it wasn't something added into me. It was just that next divergent of all possibilities. And the process of me continues to be me. It's like the old Buddha saying, you cannot step into the same river twice. You can't. Because a river, it's flowing, and it's never the exact same twice. There's different water there all the time, different things on the bottom all the time. And so with you and everything posits process theology. Process theology is more like jazz than recording music. Right? You get a recording of any of your favorite music. Remember vinyl, where you actually had a plastic thing, you put a needle on it? Right? You get the plastic thing, you put the needle on it, and it makes sound. Well, that's great. But it's only going to make that same sound over and over again. I'm only going to be Tony over and over again. If I add cancer onto it, well, I'm still Tony, now I got this other thing somebody or somewhat put on me or whatever. But process theology says God is the process of everything. So God is more like improvisational jazz that you see live, where the music gets constantly created anew in the second by the musicians playing. The needle will only give you the same thing over and over on the record. Right? You can jump it around, it's going to play what's there. That's it, it's its essence. Improvisational jazz is there's a new essence with every note. That is God. This is not dissimilar to the Tao, or the way of Taoism. The Tao being the underlying principle, not the ground or the source, but the underlying principle of how everything relates to everything else. Tillich, Adams, and process theologians are all different types of what's called religious naturalism, where the forms of religion and religious terms and concepts are not discarded, but the worldview is grounded in science, evolution, natural processes. And here's where a scientist takes a further leap with an idea of God. Nancy Ellen Abrams wrote a book. She's a scientist. Her husband's a scientist. She wrote a book called A God That Could Be Real. And she says, not only may process theology be pointing us in the right direction, we may be actually creating God as we evolve. She writes, the emerging God, after all, is a source of all meaning, old and new, and can be understood this way in any religion that doesn't require taking its teachings literally. Her husband was important in the discovery and positing and the investigation of what we now call dark matter. So this is someone who's deeply embedded in the world of science. She says, she rationally knew there cannot be any God as traditionally conceived, and yet she found herself praying, and she wondered, why am I doing this? She says, a part of my brain talked to another part as if it weren't the same thing, even though I knew it was. It helped. How to reconcile an idea of God with scientific reality. She says, I pondered. What she posits are the characteristics of a God that can be real. Oh, sorry, her God that can't be real. God existed before the universe. God created everything. God knows everything. These are Hartshorne's 6 mistakes about God, right? There really are no new thoughts. So if this is the God that can't be, she says, what can God actually be? She says, God is an emergent process. So she takes the process theology and runs in this direction and says, God is an emergent phenomenon. It's always being constructed. And she gets this from systems theory. When a system gets complex enough, it reorganizes itself into something actually different. A radically new thing emerges out of the system. And she says, this is how we create God. How God emerges from humanity in our wrestling with the ideas about God. The emerging God is the source of meaning, old and new, and can be understood in this way. Any way that any religion doesn't require taking anything literally, because it's all a process always developing. Maybe God has no face or image or concept or source or ground or process. Maybe it's a complete radical otherness. And this is a classical theological idea. It goes all the way back in Western tradition to the Hebrew Scriptures, where God's name is not named. You call God the name, because you can't say the name, because it's beyond everything. And that's where we got James Carroll's reading. It's where it gets tricky. What if God's unknowability is the most illuminating profundity humans can actually know about the idea of God? When we live in a closed creation where it's only up to us to figure out a way to understand everything, well, that leads to closed-mindedness and oppression and discarding things as less than or other. But a God that is totally beyond something we're trying to figure out as emergent phenomenon, as process, as radically beyond something we can even posit or understand. That leaves things open-ended. Hope is entirely always possible. And so we find ourselves coming full circle, in a sense, back to old traditional concepts of God. For all this deep thought, I am reminded of the old story of the little child going to bed after saying prayers at night, with a huge thunderstorm raging outside, and the terrified child in bed pulling its covers up and crying out, "Mommy, Daddy, I'm scared." And the parents, not wanting to get back out of bed yet again, say, "Don't worry, God loves you. We love you. God will take care of you." And things go silent, and the parents think they've, provided a bit of wisdom that will solve the problem of the night. And then they hear the child's voice, "I know God loves me, but right now I need someone with skin on." And so, like Yeats's poem, we need God that can be like us. So we create models of God that are like us in the prophets. This is what Jesus is in Christianity. This is what the goddess is, incarnated in form. It is entirely understandable that we want whatever God is to be able to be seen in our image. And this is the theological idea of incarnation. What would God be like if God were human? What if God were one of us? Just a stranger on a bus trying to make his way home. didn't. One of the things I guess we're left with is stories and symbols about God, which may or may not be factual, but we know to be true. What if God was one of us?